Disclaimer.
Every fantasy I ever had was played back to me.
My name is Margaret Thornton. I am 67 years old. I died for 11 minutes. This is my testimony.
Before I begin, please subscribe so more people can hear testimonies like this. I woke that morning the same way I had woken for 43 years. The alarm buzzed at 6. I reached over and switched it off before it could wake Roger. He stirred beside me, mumbled something I did not catch, and rolled over. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway in my slippers, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my feet. The kitchen was cool. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. While the water heated, I wiped down the counter, folded the dish towel, straightened the salt and pepper shakers. Everything in its place. Everything is orderly. Everything, fine. But fine was a lie I had been telling myself for 30 years. I poured the tea and stood at the window, looking out at the garden. The roses needed trimming. The fence needed painting. Roger had been saying he would get to it for months, but he never did. He never got to anything unless I reminded him 3 times. And even then, I had to manage my tone so he would not accuse me of nagging. I took a sip of tea and let my mind wander. It always wandered to the same place. To him. David. I had not seen him in 15 years, not since I retired from the hospital, but I thought about him every single day. I thought about the way he used to lean against the nurse's station and smile at me like I was the only person in the room. I thought about the sound of his laugh. The way he said my name. The conversations we used to have during night shifts when the ward was quiet and it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. Nothing ever happened between us. Not really. A few lingering glances. A hand on my shoulder that stayed a moment too long. Once, he told me I looked beautiful, and I replayed that sentence in my mind for months afterward. But nothing ever happened. I told myself that meant it was not wrong. I told myself that because I never touched him, never kissed him, never crossed any physical line, it did not count as betrayal. It was just a connection. A friendship. A harmless distraction from the monotony of my marriage. But deep down, in the part of myself I refused to examine too closely, I knew the truth. I was in love with him. I had been in love with him for 30 years. And I had spent 30 years imagining a life with him instead of living the life I had with Roger. The kettle whistled. I poured Roger's tea and brought it to him in bed. He sat up, glasses crooked on his face, hair sticking up at odd angles. "Thank you, love," he said, taking the cup from my hands. I nodded. I did not say anything. I never had much to say to him anymore. He started talking about his plans for the day. Something about the hardware store. Something about fixing the gate latch. I nodded at the right moments, but I was not really listening. I was thinking about David again. Wondering what he was doing. Wondering if he ever thought about me the way I thought about him. Roger reached for my hand. I pulled it away and stood up. "I need to start breakfast," I said. He looked at me for a moment, something flickering in his eyes that might have been hurt, or confusion, or resignation. Then he nodded and went back to his tea. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. That night, we sat at the dinner table in silence. Roger ate his meal and tried to tell me about his day. I heard words but not sentences. I was somewhere else entirely. I was imagining a different table, a different man, a different life. "Margaret." I blinked. Roger was staring at me. "Sorry, what?" I asked if you wanted to go to the garden fundraiser tomorrow. I hesitated. I did not want to go. I wanted to stay home and exist quietly in my own head, where I could control the narrative, and no one could see the woman I had become. But I said yes anyway. Because that is what I always did. I said yes. I showed up. I played the part of the dutiful wife, while my heart lived in a fantasy I had built brick by brick over 3 decades. That night, I lay in bed beside Roger and stared at the ceiling. He fell asleep quickly, his breathing deep and steady. I stayed awake for hours, replaying a conversation I had with David in 1998. I remembered every word. I had memorized it like scripture. Roger reached for me in his sleep, his arm draping over my waist. I shifted away. I did not want to be touched by him. I never wanted to be touched by him. Because when he touched me, it reminded me that I was here, in this bed, in this life, in this marriage I had stopped trying to save years ago. I closed my eyes and let myself drift back into the fantasy. In my mind, I was with David. In my mind, I was loved. In my mind, I was someone else entirely. The garden fundraiser was busier than I expected. Tables lined the pavilion, covered with baked goods and raffle tickets, and hand-painted signs advertising local causes. Roger wandered off to talk to someone from the bowling club. I poured myself a cup of tea and stood near the edge of the crowd, half listening to conversations that did not interest me. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I had convinced myself that attending this event was enough. That showing up, smiling at neighbors, playing the role of the pleasant retired nurse was the same thing as being present. It was not. But I had been pretending for so long that I no longer knew the difference. I was reaching for a biscuit when I saw him. David. He was standing near the entrance, scanning the crowd, his hand resting gently on the small of a woman's back. His wife. She was petite, silver-haired, elegant in a way I had never been. She laughed at something he said, and he smiled down at her with the same warmth I had once believed was reserved only for me. My hand froze mid-air. My breath caught in my throat. Time did not slow. It stopped. 30 years of fantasy collapsed in an instant. He was real. He was here. And he belonged to someone else. He had always belonged to someone else. I had spent 3 decades constructing an alternate reality in my mind, and in one moment, it shattered like glass against concrete. The man I had loved in secret, the man I had built an entire life around in my imagination, was not mine. He had never been mine. And the version of him I had worshipped was not even real. I felt the teacup slip from my fingers. It hit the ground and shattered. People turned to look. I did not care. My chest tightened. Not the gentle tightness of anxiety, but something sharper, heavier, like a fist closing around my heart and squeezing. I tried to breathe, but the air would not come. I reached for the table to steady myself, but my hand missed, and I stumbled forward. Roger was there suddenly, gripping my arm. "Margaret, are you all right?" I tried to answer, but the words would not form. My vision blurred. The edges of the pavilion darkened. The voices around me became muffled, distant, like I was underwater and sinking fast. "Margaret." Roger's voice was sharp now, panicked. I felt his hands on my shoulders, trying to hold me upright, but my legs gave out. I collapsed, and the world tilted violently sideways. I hit the ground, but I did not feel it. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. Once. Twice. And then it stuttered, skipped, and stopped. The pain in my chest exploded, white-hot and unbearable. And then, nothing. Silence. I was not on the ground anymore. I was floating, weightless, detached. I looked down and saw my body lying on the concrete, people crowding around, someone shouting to call an ambulance. Roger was kneeling beside me, his face pale, his hands shaking as he tried to find a pulse. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. But I could not move. I could not speak. I was no longer connected to the woman on the ground. I was somewhere else now. The light above me faded. The voices disappeared. And I felt myself falling. Not forward. Not backward. Down. I was falling through something thick and heavy, like water but darker, colder. My body felt weightless, but my soul felt heavy, burdened by something I could not name. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. Or the accumulated weight of 30 years of lies I had told myself. The air around me grew warm. Then hot. Then suffocating. I tried to scream, but no sound came. And then I landed. Not hard. Just, suddenly. Like stepping off a stair you did not know was there. I opened my eyes. I was standing on a walkway that glowed faintly beneath my feet, molten and red, like embers buried under ash. The air shimmered with heat. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, human-shaped but distant, silent, sorrowful. I looked down at my hands. My wedding ring was glowing. Not reflecting light. Glowing. Red. Hot. I tried to pull it off, but it would not move. It burned against my skin, but I could not remove it. I could not escape it. And then I heard it. A voice. Soft. Steady. Everywhere at once. Margaret. I froze. You were never faithful. The words struck me like a blow. I opened my mouth to protest, to explain, to defend myself, but nothing came out. Because I knew. I had always known. And then. I was falling. Not toward the ground, but through it. I was falling through darkness so thick it felt like drowning in oil. My lungs screamed for air that did not exist. My arms flailed, grasping at nothing. I tried to scream, but no sound came. Just the rushing wind, the violent sensation of descent, and the terrible certainty that I was going somewhere I could not escape. And then I stopped. Not gently. Just, suddenly. Like stepping off a cliff and landing on solid ground before you realized you had fallen at all. I gasped. My chest heaved. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see blood, broken bones, something shattered from the fall. But my hands were whole. Pale. Trembling. I was standing. I blinked and forced my eyes to adjust to the dim red glow that pulsed beneath my feet. The ground was not ground at all. It was a walkway, smooth and dark, with veins of molten light running through it like lava beneath a cooled crust. Heat radiated upward, pressing against my skin, but it did not burn. Not yet. I turned slowly, trying to understand where I was. The air shimmered with heat. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, human-shaped but indistinct, like silhouettes carved from smoke. They did not approach. They simply stood there, silent and sorrowful, their forms flickering in and out of focus. I took a step forward, and the walkway beneath me pulsed brighter for a moment, as if reacting to my presence. "Where am I?" I whispered. No one answered. But I already knew. This was not heaven. I looked down at my left hand. My wedding ring was still there, but it was glowing now, faintly red, like iron heated in a forge. I touched it with my right hand, expecting it to burn, but it only radiated warmth. I tried to twist it off, but it would not move. It was fused to my finger, as if it had become part of my skin. Panic rose in my throat. "Take it off," I whispered, pulling harder. "Please, just take it off." But it would not budge. I looked up, searching for an exit, a door, a way back, but there was nothing. Only the walkway stretching endlessly in both directions, the shadows standing silent and still, and the oppressive heat pressing down on me like guilt made tangible. And then I saw it. A bed. It appeared in front of me, maybe 20 feet away, rising out of the molten walkway like it had always been there and I had only just noticed. It was a marriage bed. My marriage bed. The same wooden frame Roger and I had bought 40 years ago. The same faded quilt his mother had made for us as a wedding gift. But it was not the same. It was burning. Not with flames. With embers. The mattress glowed like coals left smoldering after a fire, red and orange and pulsing with heat. The wooden frame was charred black, cracked and fragile, as if it might collapse at any moment. The quilt was half burned, hanging off the edge in tatters. I stared at it, unable to move. "No," I whispered. But I could not look away. Because I knew what it meant. That bed was my marriage. And it was destroyed. I took a step toward it, my legs trembling. The heat intensified as I got closer, but I kept walking. I needed to see it. I needed to understand. When I reached the bed, I stopped and looked down at the glowing embers. They pulsed softly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. And as I stared, images began to appear in the light. I saw myself lying in that bed 30 years ago, turning away from Roger when he reached for me. I saw myself staring at the ceiling, lost in a daydream about David while my husband lay beside me, lonely and confused. I saw myself night after night, year after year, choosing fantasy over reality, choosing a man who was not mine over the man who was. Tears blurred my vision. "I did not mean to," I whispered. But that was a lie. I had meant to. Every single time. I looked down at my wedding ring again. It was glowing brighter now, hotter, the red light pulsing in time with the embers of the bed. I tried again to pull it off, twisting it, yanking it, desperate to remove it. It would not move. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Please, I am sorry. I am sorry." And then the bed shifted. The embers flared brighter, and the entire structure collapsed inward, crumbling into ash. But the ash did not fall. It rose. It swirled around me like smoke, and within the smoke, I saw shapes forming. Scrolls. They unrolled slowly in the air, suspended by nothing, glowing faintly at the edges, as if they were burning from the inside out. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was mine. My wedding vows. "I, Margaret, take you, Roger, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward. For better, for worse. For richer, for poorer. In sickness and in health. To love and to cherish. Forsaking all others. As long as we both shall live. Forsaking all others." The words glowed brighter, and then they began to burn. The edges of the scroll curled and blackened, turning to ash, disintegrating before my eyes. I reached out to stop it, to catch the pieces, but they crumbled in my hands, falling through my fingers like sand. "No," I whispered. "No, please." But the vows kept burning. Word by word. Line by line. until there was nothing left but ash floating in the air around me. And then the voice spoke. It was not loud. It was not harsh. But it filled the entire space, pressing into my chest, wrapping around my heart, undeniable and absolute. You made a covenant. I froze. And you broke it every day. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I doubled over, gasping, my hands pressed against my knees. I did not. I never. But I could not finish the sentence. Because it was not true. I had broken it. Every single day. For 30 years. I looked up, searching for the source of the voice, but I saw nothing. Only the shadows. Only the light. Only the ash still falling softly around me. I thought it did not count, I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought, because I never touched him, because it was only in my mind. I thought it did not matter. Silence. And then the voice spoke again, softer this time, but no less devastating. Your body stayed. But your heart left long ago. I felt something tighten around my wrists. I looked down. Chains. Thin. Delicate. But unbreakable. They wrapped around my wrists like bracelets, glowing faintly red, warm against my skin. I tried to pull them off, but they would not move. They were part of me now. What are these? I whispered. But I already knew. They were consequences. The consequences of every fantasy I entertained. Every thought I indulged. Every moment I chose David over Roger in the privacy of my own mind. I sank to my knees on the molten walkway, the chains dangling from my wrists, the ash of my vows still falling around me like snow. And for the first time in 30 years, I had no excuse. No justification. No lie I could tell myself to make it hurt less. I was guilty. And I had been guilty all along. The ash settled around me like a blanket of regret. I knelt there on the glowing walkway, my wrists bound by chains I could not see, but could feel with every breath. The heat pressed down on me, not burning my skin, but weighing on my chest, my shoulders, my soul. I did not know how long I would stay there. Time felt irrelevant in this place. There was no clock. No sun. Only the pulsing red glow beneath me and the distant, sorrowful cries echoing from somewhere I could not see. And then the images began. They did not appear in front of me. They appeared around me. Projected onto the air itself, like memories made visible, undeniable, inescapable. I saw myself at 37, standing in the hospital break room, laughing at something David said. I watched as he leaned in closer, his hand brushing my arm, his eyes holding mine a moment too long. I watched myself smile, lean in too, say something flirtatious I had convinced myself was harmless. And then the image shifted. I saw Roger at home that same night, sitting alone at the dinner table, the food I had made growing cold. He looked tired. Sad. He checked his watch. Waited. And then he ate alone. The image faded, and another took its place. I was 42. Lying in bed beside Roger. He reached for my hand in the dark, and I pulled it away, pretending to be asleep. I watched myself turn toward the wall, my eyes open, my mind 1,000 miles away. In David's arms. In David's bed. In a life that did not exist. The images came faster now, one after another, 30 years of betrayal played out in vivid, brutal clarity. I saw myself zoning out during conversations with Roger. I saw myself scrolling through old photos of David on social media when Roger was in the shower. I saw myself lying beside my husband while imagining another man's touch, another man's voice, another man's love. And then I saw Roger's face. Not angry. Not accusing. Just heartbroken. I saw him reaching for me year after year, trying to connect, trying to understand why I had become so distant, so cold, so unreachable. I saw him asking me if I was okay, if something was wrong, if there was anything he could do. And I saw myself brush him off. Every single time. I am fine, I had said. But I was not fine. I was in love with another man. A man who was not my husband. A man who had never been mine. The images stopped. I was left kneeling in silence, trembling, tears streaming down my face. I did not know, I whispered. I did not know it hurt him that much. The voice returned. Calm. Clear. Unwavering. You knew. I shook my head, sobbing. No. No, I did not. I thought he did not notice. I thought it was just in my head. I thought. You knew. The words cut through me like a blade. And I realized, it was true. I had known. Deep down, I had always known. I had known that I was emotionally absent. I had known that I was hurting him. I had known that I was choosing fantasy over reality, selfishness over sacrifice, lust over love. I had known. And I had done it anyway. What you hid from man, the voice continued, you displayed before God. I looked up, tears blurring my vision. I am sorry, I whispered. I am so sorry. The presence drew closer. I could not see it, but I could feel it. Holy. Overwhelming. Inescapable. Lust is not love, the voice said. It is theft. And you have been stealing from your covenant for 30 years. The chains around my wrists tightened. Not painfully. Just firmly. A reminder. A consequence. I looked down at them and understood. Every time I fantasized about David, I had stolen intimacy from Roger. Every time I daydreamed about another life, I had robbed my husband of my presence. Every time I chose a man who was not mine, I had taken something sacred and given it to someone who had no right to it. I had been a thief. And my marriage had been the victim. The images appeared again, but this time they were different. I saw David. Not the version I had built in my mind. Not the fantasy. The real man. I saw him laughing with his wife. I saw him holding her hand. I saw him living a life that had nothing to do with me. He was happy. Content. He had moved on decades ago. He had never thought about me the way I thought about him. He had never loved me. He had never even known. The realization shattered something inside me. I had wasted 30 years of my life worshipping a man who did not know I existed. I had sacrificed my marriage, my integrity, my soul. For a fantasy. For nothing. I collapsed forward, my forehead pressed against the glowing walkway, sobs racking my body. I am a fool, I whispered. I am a fool. The voice softened, but it did not relent. You are an adulteress. The word struck me like a physical blow. Adulteress. Not in body, but in heart. And in the eyes of God, it was the same. I thought of Jesus' words. Words I had read 100 times, but never truly believed applied to me. Anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I had done that. For 30 years. I had committed adultery in my heart. Every single day. And God had seen it all. The chains tightened again. The walkway pulsed beneath me. The heat intensified, and I felt something shift. The ground beneath me cracked, and I looked down. Beneath the molten surface, I saw names. Flickering. Fading. Burning. Roger's name. My name. Intertwined. And slowly, separating. No, I whispered, reaching down as if I could stop it. No, please. Not that. But the names continued to drift apart, the fire consuming the space between them. I looked up, desperate, pleading. Please, I begged. Please, I will change. I will fix it. Just, give me another chance. Silence. And then, the fire beneath me shifted. The chains around my wrists tightened one final time. And I understood. This was only the beginning of what I needed to see. And then, everything changed. The fire beneath me softened. The oppressive heat that had been pressing down on my chest lifted, just slightly, like a weight being removed one stone at a time. The chains around my wrists loosened, not breaking, but no longer biting into my skin with the same relentless pressure. I looked up, tears streaming down my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And I saw light. Not the red glow of the molten walkway. Not the flickering shadows. Real light. Pure. White. Breaking through the darkness like dawn splitting the night. It did not burn my eyes. It did not blind me. It simply was. And within that light, I heard the voice again. Not harsh. Not accusing. Just certain. Go back. I froze. Go back. And live differently. The words washed over me like water over a wound, stinging and soothing all at once. I wanted to speak, to ask if I had heard correctly, to beg for clarification, but before I could form the words, the ground beneath me shifted. The walkway cracked. The light expanded. And I was falling again. But this time, I was not falling down. I was falling up. The darkness rushed past me, the heat faded, and suddenly I felt something sharp and violent and unbearably real. Pain. My chest exploded. I gasped, and air flooded into my lungs like fire. My back arched off the ground, my hands clawed at nothing, and my eyes flew open. Lights. Bright. Blinding. Flashing red and blue. Voices shouting. Hands pressing on my chest. Someone counting. She's back. We've got a pulse. I tried to speak, but I could not. My throat was raw, my body trembling uncontrollably. I blinked, and the world came into focus in fragments. Sky. Faces. A stretcher. Roger. Roger was there, kneeling beside me, his face pale and wet with tears. His hands were shaking as he reached for mine, gripping it so tightly it hurt. Margaret, he choked out. Margaret, stay with me. Please. Please stay. I squeezed his hand back. It was all I could do. The paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, and the world tilted again. I saw the crowd of people standing around, staring, their faces a blur of shock and concern. I saw the pavilion. The tables. The shattered teacup still on the ground where I had dropped it. And then I saw him. David. Standing at the edge of the crowd, his wife beside him, looking at me with polite, distant concern. The kind of concern you show a stranger. Because that is what I was to him. A stranger. I turned my head away, closed my eyes, and let the tears fall. I woke 3 days later in a hospital bed. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the faint hum of machinery. Sunlight streamed through the window, warm and gentle, and for a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. But then I felt the thaw in my arm, the stiffness in my chest, the weight of the blanket over my legs. I was alive. I turned my head slowly, wincing at the ache in my neck, and saw Roger asleep in the chair beside my bed. His head was tilted back at an awkward angle, his mouth slightly open, his glasses crooked on his face. His hand rested on the edge of my bed, as if even in sleep, he was reaching for me. I stared at him, and something broke open inside me. He had stayed. After everything. After 43 years of emotional distance, cold shoulders, and half-hearted replies. After decades of me giving my heart to another man, while he stood quietly beside me, trying to love a wife who was never really there. He had stayed. I reached out slowly and placed my hand over his. His eyes opened immediately. He sat up, blinking, confused for a moment, and then he saw me looking at him. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am sorry," I said. The words came out hoarse and broken, but they were real. He shook his head, tears filling his eyes. "You do not need to apologize. You are alive. That is all that matters." But he was wrong. I did need to apologize. For so many things. He pulled his chair closer, his hand gripping mine tightly, and we sat there in silence, both of us crying, both of us holding on to something we had almost lost. I was discharged a week later. The doctors said I had been lucky. My heart had stopped for 11 minutes, but somehow, miraculously, there was no permanent damage. They called it a medical anomaly. A second chance. I called it exactly what it was. Mercy. Roger drove me home, and we did not talk much on the way. He helped me into the house, made me tea, brought me a blanket, and sat beside me on the couch. We watched television in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It was not cold. It was not distant. It was just quiet. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The molten walkway. The burning marriage bed. The vows turning to ash. The chains. The voice. Go back. And live differently. I turned my head and looked at Roger sleeping beside me. His breathing was deep and steady, his face peaceful in a way I had not noticed in years. And I made a decision. I could not go back to who I was. I could not pretend anymore. I could not keep living a double life, one foot in reality and the other in a fantasy that had nearly destroyed me. If God had given me another chance, I was going to take it. But that meant I had to do something I had been avoiding for 30 years. I had to tell the truth. 2 weeks after I came home, I asked Roger to sit down with me at the kitchen table. He looked at me, concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to go back to the doctor?" "No," I said quietly. "I need to talk to you." He sat down slowly, his eyes searching my face. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But I forced myself to speak. "Roger," I said, my voice trembling. "For 30 years, I have been unfaithful to you." He froze. "Not with my body," I continued, tears already spilling down my cheeks. "But with my heart. With my mind. With every part of me that should have been yours." I told him everything. About David. About the fantasies. About the decades I spent mentally and emotionally checked out of our marriage while physically going through the motions. About the alternate life I had built in my head, the man I had loved in secret, the choices I made every single day to betray him in ways he never knew. I told him about what I saw when I died. The burning bed. The crumbling vows. The chains. The truth God revealed to me about what I had done. And I told him I was sorry. Roger did not say anything for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the table, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. And then he stood up and walked out of the room. I sat there alone, trembling, waiting, terrified that I had just destroyed the last thing I had left. But I knew I had done the right thing. Because repentance is not just feeling sorry. It is telling the truth. Roger did not speak to me for 3 days. He slept in the guest room. He left for work early and came home late. When we were in the same room, he was polite, distant, careful. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He just withdrew. And I let him. Because I knew he had every right to. On the 4th day, he came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes and said, "I think we need to separate for a while." I nodded, my hand still in the soapy water, my throat too tight to speak. "I am not leaving you," he said quietly. "But I need time. I need to think. I need to figure out if we can." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I moved out the next week. I rented a small flat on the other side of Christchurch, close enough that I could still attend the same church, but far enough that we had space. Roger helped me move my things. He was kind, gentle, but distant. And I understood. Because for 30 years, I had been distant too. The separation was the hardest thing I have ever done. Not because I was alone, but because I finally had to face myself. I started seeing a Christian counselor, a woman named Patricia, who had been recommended by our pastor. She was in her 70s, soft-spoken, with eyes that saw straight through every excuse I tried to make. In our first session, I told her everything. About David. About the fantasies. About the NDE. About the confession. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she leaned forward and said, "Margaret, do you understand that what you did was adultery?" I hesitated. But I never touched him. I never even told him how I felt. Jesus said that anyone who looks at someone lustfully has already committed adultery in their heart, she said gently. You spent 30 years committing adultery in your mind. And that matters to God. The words hit me like a slap. I had known it. I had seen it in that place of fire and consequence. But hearing it spoken aloud, in plain language, made it undeniable. I thought it was harmless, I whispered. Nothing that separates you from your covenant is harmless, Patricia said. Your thoughts are not neutral. They shape your heart. And your heart shapes your actions. You may not have physically betrayed Roger, but you emotionally abandoned him. And that is just as devastating. I broke down sobbing. Because she was right. Over the next 6 months, Patricia taught me how to guard my mind. She taught me to recognize the moment a lustful thought entered my head, and to immediately take it captive, to reject it, to replace it with truth. She taught me to pray over my marriage, to confess my sin daily, to ask God to heal the parts of me that had been drawn to fantasy instead of reality. It was not easy. There were days I failed. Days I caught myself slipping back into old patterns, imagining scenarios that were not real, longing for things that were not mine. But each time, I stopped. I confessed. I redirected. And slowly, I began to change. Roger and I met for coffee once a month during the separation. At first, the conversations were stiff, awkward, full of long pauses and careful words. But over time, something shifted. He started asking me questions. Real questions. About what I saw when I died. About what I was learning in counseling. About whether I truly believed I could change. And I answered him honestly. I do not know if I can be the wife you deserve, I told him one afternoon, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea. But I know I cannot be the wife I was. That woman nearly destroyed us both. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine. I have been angry, he said quietly. Angrier than I have ever been in my life. And hurt. So deeply hurt. I know, I whispered. But I have also been praying, he continued. And I keep hearing the same thing. Forgive her. The way I have forgiven you. Tears blurred my vision. I do not deserve that, I said. No, he agreed. You do not. But that is what covenant means. It is not about what we deserve. It is about what we choose. He reached across the table and took my hand. I choose to forgive you, Margaret. Not because you have earned it. But because that is what God has asked me to do. I could not speak. I could only cry. I want to try again, he said. But it has to be different. We have to be different. I know, I whispered. And I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I mean it. We moved back in together 8 months after I died. It was not a fairy tale. It was not perfect. There were still hard conversations. Still moments of tension. Still wounds that needed time to heal. But it was real. For the first time in 30 years, I was fully present in my marriage. I listened when Roger spoke. I asked him about his day and actually cared about the answer. I held his hand. I looked him in the eyes. I chose him. Every single day, I chose him. And slowly, carefully, we rebuilt what I had torn down. I am 67 years old now. Roger and I have been remarried in our hearts, even though we never legally separated. We renewed our vows in a small ceremony at our church, just the two of us and our pastor. I spoke the same words I had spoken 43 years earlier. But this time, I meant them. I learned something in that place of fire and consequence that I wish I had learned sooner. Lust is not love. It is theft. Every time you fantasize about someone who is not your spouse, you are stealing from your marriage. You are stealing intimacy, presence, emotional energy, and devotion. You are taking what belongs to your covenant and giving it to someone who has no right to it. And God sees it. He sees every thought, every imagined conversation, every daydream, every moment you choose someone else in the privacy of your own mind. And it matters. It matters because your thoughts shape your heart. And your heart shapes your life. I also learned that repentance is not just feeling sorry. It is telling the truth. It is confessing. It is changing. I could have kept my secret. Roger never would have known. But God knew. And I knew. And that was enough to condemn me. True repentance requires honesty, even when it costs you everything. And finally, I learned that covenant is not about feelings. It is about choice. There were days I did not feel like loving Roger. Days I did not feel attracted to him. Days I felt bored, frustrated, distant. But I chose him anyway. Because that is what the covenant means. It means you stay. You fight. You forgive. You rebuild. Even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. If you are watching this, and you are living a double life in your mind, I want you to hear me. You are not safe just because no one knows. God knows. And one day, you will stand before Him, and every hidden thing will be revealed. Do not wait until you die to face the truth. Face it now. Confess it now. Change it now. Your marriage is worth it. Your soul is worth it. And the God who showed me mercy in that place of fire and consequence is the same God who will show you mercy if you turn to Him with a repentant heart. Thank you for listening to my story. If it has touched you, please subscribe to this channel. There are more testimonies like mine, and they might be exactly what you need to hear. Turn on notifications so you do not miss them. And if you feel led, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The next testimony is already on your screen. Watch it. Because your eternity might depend on what you do with the truth you have just heard.